Welcome to our deep dive on OKRs. We've got a ton of materials here, including excerpts from John Doerr's Measure What Matters, all about this goal-setting system. It's pretty amazing, actually. It seems like companies like Google, Intel, even U2 swear by it.
It's quite a versatile system for sure.
So are you ready to help us unpack all this?
Definitely. Let's dive into it.
Awesome. So it looks like the origins of these OKRs go back to Intel and their famous leader, Andy Grove.
That's right. Grove really helped Intel succeed with his very data-driven, very rigorous management approach. He introduced this formal goal-setting system, basically what we now know as OKRs, back in the 70s.
So how do these objectives and key results work as a system?
Well, it's this two-part thing, right? You've got objectives. They spell out the what, those ambitious things you're shooting for, like your North Star.
Become the leading provider of eco-friendly clothing, something like that.
Exactly. And then key results come in. They lay out those quantifiable steps, the how you're going to get to that objective. So for your sustainable apparel example, it might be partner with 3 big ethical manufacturing places by the end of the next quarter.
Oh, so it's not just like dreaming big, but breaking it down into things you can actually measure and do step by step. Like a strength of OKRs is that they're so specific.
Absolutely. The power of OKRs is in making things super clear, deciding what really matters and then staying committed to that path you've set. And a really good example of that is the story of Remind.
Remind, the platform for secure communication between teachers and parents.
That's it. The founders, Brett and David Kopp, they were really into solving communication problems in schools. They started with tons of ideas, but quickly realized they needed to be more focused.
So how did OKRs help them narrow it down?
Well, even before they officially adopted OKRs, Brett committed to interviewing 200 teachers.
200. Wow, that's dedication.
It was, to understand their needs, and it was a big reason for their early success.
Interesting.
They found out that communicating outside of school was a huge problem. Teachers were doing things like pinning notes to kids to let parents know about homework. Can you imagine?
I remember those days, actually.
So as Remind grew, OKRs became even more important. They had to stay focused even as things got more complex.
So even though they knew what they wanted to do from the start, OKRs provided the framework they needed as they grew.
Right. They moved from a giant to-do list to very carefully deciding what was most important each quarter, whether it was launching on a new platform or really nailing down a feature. It was their compass. It helped them navigate.
That makes a lot of sense. I wonder how that focus on prioritizing works for a company like Google, though. They're all about these enormous, audacious goals.
It's a perfect example, actually, of OKRs in action. Google's early goal, their vision, was to organize the world's information.
That's a pretty ambitious goal.
And they actually had this revenue target, this number they wanted to hit, $10 billion.
$10 billion. As a startup, that's bold.
That was Larry Page's idea, and it did seem kind of impossible back then. And that's where John Doerr came in. He learned about OKRs at Intel, remember, and he brought the system to Google.
So OKRs were part of how Google got so big so fast.
Totally. It helped them break that huge vision down into smaller chunks, stuff they could measure quarter by quarter, like building a skyscraper one brick at a time.
So it can work for small startups and giant companies like Google.
That's right. The system can adapt, you can scale it, but the leaders have to really believe in it. When they really embrace OKRs, it sets an example for the whole company.
So it's not just like checking boxes. Those goals have to become part of the company's DNA, part of the culture.
Exactly. And a good way to show that culture is MyFitnessPal. You know them?
Sure, the health and fitness app.
You see what they did then. For the founders, Mike and Albert Lee, alignment was easy at the beginning. They were totally on the same page.
But I can imagine it's hard to keep everyone aligned as a company grows.
It is. And that's the problem they ran into. How do you keep that synergy when the teams are getting bigger and you're adding new products?
And I bet OKRs helped them figure that out.
They did. They noticed their engineering team was getting pulled in different directions by all the product managers. So they implemented OKRs so everyone knew what the real priorities were each quarter.
It seems like a pretty sensible approach. But how do you keep OKRs from just becoming another layer of bureaucracy, especially in a fast-moving environment?
Transparency is really important, and communication. So MyFitnessPal, they made all their OKRs visible to everyone in the company, even teams that weren't using the system yet.
So everybody could see the big goals, know how their work fit into the bigger picture.
Right. And it built trust, And it made things less complicated when it came to sharing resources.
Sounds like a good way to get everyone working together without, like, stifling creativity.
Yeah. Exactly. MyFitnessPal's story also shows that it's an ongoing process. They were always tweaking their OKR process. They adjusted their objectives and key results to match their changing priorities.
So we've seen how OKRs can help with focus and alignment. But what about accountability? How do you make sure things actually get done?
Well, remember, key results, they're about measurable things. You either hit them or you don't. And that creates accountability right there.
No hiding in the reports then, huh?
No hiding. OKRs are all about data, about regularly checking in and being honest with yourself about how you're doing. At Intel, they even had a tough grading system for OKRs.
So you couldn't avoid the results.
Nope. And they actually thought of failure as part of the process. If a team always hit 100% of their objectives, it meant they weren't setting the bar high enough.
It's like they thought failure meant you were being ambitious.
Exactly. And that brings us to another great thing about OKRs. Stretch goals.
So it's all about pushing the boundaries and trying to achieve something really great instead of playing it safe.
Exactly. And this idea of stretching, it applies to individuals, teams, and whole companies. It's about reaching your full potential.
But how do you make sure it's still realistic? You don't want people to feel like they're always failing.
It's a balance, for sure. And that's why you have to be clear about committed OKRs, the ones that are absolutely essential, and aspirational OKRs. Those are the bolder, more ambitious targets.
So it's okay to miss those aspirational goals.
It's not just okay, it's expected. The idea is to shoot for the moon, learn from the process, and celebrate the wins along the way.
It's like you want a culture where you're constantly improving, not one where people are punished for trying to be excellent.
Well said. Now, here's where things get even more interesting. We've talked about the mechanics of OKRs. But what about the people, the human side of it all?
Right. So it's not enough to just write down goals and track them on a spreadsheet.
Absolutely not. It's when you combine OKRs with those ongoing discussions, candid feedback, and real appreciation for what people are doing, that's where the magic happens. We call those CFRs: conversations, feedback, and recognition.
So CFRs, they're like the spark that brings OKRs to life.
You could say that. It's all about adding that human touch. Think of it like this. What if companies truly listened to their employees, gave feedback in real time, and used technology to have meaningful conversations about goals and performance?
That sounds pretty great for any employee.
And a lot of companies are doing it. This idea of combining OKRs and CFRs, it's the future of goal setting and performance management.
Wow. We've come a long way from teachers pinning notes on kids.
We have.
So before we jump into what that future looks like, let me ask you this. What stood out to you the most about this system so far? What are you most curious about? Think about that for a minute, because when we come back, we're going to explore how this powerful combo of OKRs and CFRs is transforming companies. From tech giants to, believe it or not, pizza startups.
And rock bands, too.
Oh, wait, rock bands, too. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back.
So let's look at how these OKRs and CFRs, this whole dynamic duo, actually works in real life. You mentioned pizza startups earlier. What's the story there?
Oh, this is a good one. It's Zoom Pizza. And they're like shaking up the pizza world. They've got this whole thing with technology. And of course, they're using OKRs and CFRs.
Robots making pizza. Now that's innovative.
It's more than a gimmick, though. They use robots for some of the work, like flattening the dough, spreading the sauce. That frees up the human workers to focus on other things.
Like those fancy toppings and making sure customers are happy.
Exactly. They really care about using good ingredients and making sure the whole customer experience is great. And that's where the whole OKR and CFR thing comes in.
So how did they go from this small operation to like what they call the Amazon of food?
Well, like a lot of startups, they started with a simple project management system. But pretty soon, they realized they needed something more robust, more flexible.
Yeah, I can imagine things get a little crazy when you're dealing with robots, making food, and trying to grow fast.
Right, so that's when they turned to OKRs. They needed a system that would give them clarity, align everyone on those big, ambitious goals.
So how did OKRs help them manage all those moving parts?
Well, for one thing, it made them actually talk about what their priorities were, what was most important: perfecting the robots, the recipes, expanding their delivery zone. OKRs gave them a way to make those decisions in a transparent way together.
And I bet those regular check-ins and feedback sessions were important, especially with such a diverse team.
You got it. They had software engineers, chefs, delivery drivers, everyone speaking different languages. But OKRs and CFRs, they became their common language, the thing they all understood.
It's amazing how OKRs can bridge the gap between different departments and skill sets.
And it's not just about efficiency either. Zoom Pizza uses OKRs to actually reinforce their core values.
So it's more than just hitting numbers. It's about building a culture that reflects their mission, their values.
Exactly. Like one of their objectives is delight customers, which comes from this idea they have that serving food to people is a sacred trust. So they track key results like customer satisfaction scores, ratings, all that, to make sure they're living up to that.
That's pretty inspiring, honestly, to see a company using OKRs not just to be successful, but also to have a positive impact on the world.
And it's working. Their success really shows what can happen when you combine big goals with constant improvement and a culture of feedback.
Okay, so we've got robots making pizzas, teachers texting students. Where else are we seeing these OKRs pop up?
How about rock and roll?
Really?
Yeah. U2, the band, you know them, they've been using OKRs for over a decade.
I never would have guessed that. What are their objectives? World domination.
Not quite, though their goals are pretty big. Things like ending extreme poverty, tackling global health crises.
Hold on, U2 is using a business goal-setting system for their activism.
They are, and it's actually working really well. It all started when John Doerr, who we know is a big OKR guy and also a big U2 fan, he joined the board of their nonprofit organization, One.
So he introduced Bono to the world of OKRs.
Pretty much. At first, One was mostly about passion and intuition. They'd pick a cause and go after it with everything they had.
I can see how that might work for a band. But how do you apply that to something as complex as global development?
That's where OKRs came in. They needed structure, something to channel that energy, help them decide what to focus on, and actually measure the impact they were having.
So they went from fight the power to measure the results.
Basically. And it made them ask some tough questions. Who were they actually working for? Were the people they were trying to help actually having a say in the process?
So OKRs help them become more data-driven, more accountable, even in the world of activism.
That's right. And it wasn't always easy. They had to come to terms with, maybe not hitting all of their ambitious goals.
Even rock stars got to learn to measure their progress, I guess.
That's a big lesson for anyone using OKRs, actually. It's not about being perfect. It's about setting those clear intentions, tracking your progress, and learning along the way.
This whole U2 thing is wild. It seems like you can use OKRs for almost anything.
That's the point. The principles, they're universal. Focus, alignment, accountability, that drive to be great.
Okay, so we've got pizza robots, rock star activists, but what about those big companies we all use every day? The tech giants that shape so much of our digital lives.
One of the best stories about this transformation is Adobe. They make Photoshop, right? And a bunch of other creative tools.
Adobe, yeah. They have been around forever, haven't they?
Since the 80s. And for a long time, they had that typical annual performance review system, the dreaded stack rankings and all that.
I still have nightmares about those.
Well, in 2012, this really brave executive, Donna Morris, she decided to challenge the status quo.
What made her want to make such a big change?
It was a moment of clarity, actually. Jet lag and a frank conversation with a journalist in India.
Sounds like the perfect recipe for a revolution.
It was. Donna basically announced to the world that Adobe was ditching annual reviews. They were going to move to a more continuous, feedback-driven way of doing things.
Wow, that's bold. Did she get fired?
Nope, just the opposite. It started this big conversation throughout the company, and eventually they created Check-In, their new performance management system.
So how does Check-In work?
It's all about having these frequent, quick conversations focus on three things: goals and expectations, which is their version of OKRs, regular feedback, and career growth.
So no more waiting a whole year to find out how you did.
Exactly. Managers and employees connect all the time to talk about progress, give feedback, make adjustments.
That sounds like a much better system than those old, rigid performance reviews.
And it's working great. Adobe has seen improvements in engagement, productivity, innovation. It's the whole package.
That's impressive. They're really embracing the future of work, aren't they?
They are. And they're setting a great example for other companies who want to move beyond those old performance management systems.
So we've got pizza robots, rock star activists, and tech giants all embracing this new approach to goals and performance.
It's pretty clear, right? OKRs and CFRs, they're not just a fad.
They're powerful tools. They help people do their best work, come up with new ideas, and feel more connected to their jobs.
And as we've seen, it goes way beyond just the corporate world.
Right. From fighting poverty to just being more productive in your own life, these principles of focus, alignment, accountability, and stretch, you can use them for anything, really.
The key is to keep learning from your experiences and never stop trying to achieve great things.
Well said. And for those listening who want to start their own OKR journey, we'll have some tips and resources in the show notes.
But before we get to that, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the cultural impact of OKRs and CFRs. There's some really cool research on high-performing teams and the importance of transparency in building a great work environment.
Stay tuned, folks. We're going even deeper. Welcome back. So we've seen how these systems drive actual results, right? But now let's talk about the impact on company culture. You mentioned some interesting research on high-performing teams.
Oh, yeah. Google did this big internal study. They called it Project Aristotle. They looked at 180 teams to figure out, what made them so successful.
Okay, fascinating. What did they find?
It might surprise you, but it wasn't about having the smartest people or the coolest perks. The biggest factor was psychological safety.
Psychological safety. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. It's basically creating a space where everyone feels safe taking risks, speaking up, and, admitting mistakes without being afraid of getting punished or judged.
So building trust and allowing people to be vulnerable within a team.
Exactly. That feeling of safety, it's essential for creativity, innovation, and having those productive, honest conversations.
I can see how that ties into this whole CFR thing. If people feel safe to speak their minds, those conversations are going to be richer, more meaningful.
Absolutely. And it's not just about feeling safe within your team. Project Aristotle also found that having clear goals and understanding how your work contributes to the bigger picture, that's important too.
Making those connections between individual efforts and the company's success.
Right. And that's where OKRs come in. When everyone can see what the goals are, it creates that sense of alignment and shared mission.
It's like everyone's playing from the same playbook, but they still have the freedom to improvise and, be creative.
That's a great way to put it. And this focus on psychological safety and transparency, it's not just a Google thing either.
So it's more than just having a slide in the office.
Way more. It's about making those principles part of everything you do, how you communicate, how you treat each other.
Building a culture where everyone feels valued and empowered.
Exactly. And when you have that, amazing things can happen.
So we've talked a lot about companies using OKRs and CFRs. But what about us, regular people? Can we use these ideas in our own lives, even if we're not CEOs or rock stars?
Of course. That's what's so great about these ideas. They can be used by anyone. You can use OKRs to achieve personal goals, manage your time better, or finally get around to that passion project you've been putting off.
Okay, but how does that actually work? Do I need a fancy spreadsheet and weekly meetings with myself?
It doesn't have to be complicated. Just start by identifying 1 or 2 big goals you want to achieve, say, in the next 3 months. Then break those goals down into maybe 3 to 5 measurable key results.
So if my objective is to write a novel, my key results might be writing a certain number of words every week or finishing specific chapters by certain dates.
Exactly. And don't forget the CFR part. Tell a friend about your goals, find someone to hold you accountable, or join a writing group for support and feedback.
Like having your own personal board of directors.
That's a great way to think about it. And don't be afraid to adjust your goals as you go. Life happens. Sometimes you need to change things up, reprioritize.
That flexibility is key. It's not about sticking to a plan no matter what. It's about staying focused on what really matters and moving towards your goals, even if it's not always a straight line.
And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about setting intentions, taking action, and celebrating those small wins along the way.
Well, this has been a fascinating journey exploring OKRs and CFRs, their origins, their strengths, the real impact they're having. But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
I'm all ears.
We've seen how these systems can transform businesses and empower individuals. But, their true power lies in their potential to build a better future for everyone.
I like where you're going with this.
Imagine a world where governments use OKRs to fight climate change, where schools use CFRs to foster a love of learning, where every single person feels empowered to pursue their dreams with focus and purpose.
Now that's a vision worth striving for.
And it all starts with these simple yet profound questions. What really matters? How are we going to get there? And how can we support each other along the way?
To all our listeners out there, as you go out into the world with these insights, remember to embrace the power of OKRs and CFRs.
Set bold goals, track your progress, seek out feedback, and never stop pushing yourself to be better. Because when we focus our collective energy on what truly matters, we can achieve incredible things together.
Until next time, keep learning, growing, and reaching for those stars.
And remember, the future is what we make it.